right now on Close Up with The Hollywood Reporter.
But if she's just like, I know what to do, you'd be like, you know?
I gotta be very clear. I did not distort any facts about Steve Jobs.
I was like, what's it like being like really rich? And he was just like, there's like nothing to buy.
We'll hear from the writers who crafted the year's best scripts. Aaron Sorkin, Steve Jobs. Meg LeFauve, Inside Out. Nick Hornby, Brooklyn. Emma Donoghue, Room. Tom McCarthy, Spotlight. Amy Schumer, Trainwreck. Hello and welcome to Close Up with The Hollywood Reporter. I'm Stephen Galloway, Executive Editor Features.
And I'm Matt Bellany, Executive Editor.
And let's get started.
I'd like to start with a question for the whole group. What has been your most difficult moment, your biggest mistake you've made professionally, and how did you recover from that?
People I slept with in college are popping up in my mind, but nothing about my career.
I started trying to write scripts before I wrote books. And I didn't know what I was doing, who I was writing for, what they were. And there's a lot of time I won't get back. I think if I'd known what I know now, if I'd known that back then I would have saved myself quite a lot of work.
Have you revisited any of those scripts?
Oh, God, no.
Okay.
I don't even know if they exist. They weren't written on computer. They were written on typewriter.
What's that?
Well, I would say just recently, with the newsroom, the show's relationship with the critics kind of ran hot and cold. And in addition to that, I really struggled writing it, except for really the last season. And the last season was an abbreviated season, just 6 episodes. It just always felt like I had a pebble in my shoe. If I can, I try to start the next thing before the last thing is over. So like while we were shooting Steve Jobs, I was writing the next screenplay.
Why do you think you had trouble writing that?
Why do I think I had trouble writing the newsroom? It's because Amy kept making fun of me.
Well, that's true.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Did you have trouble spoofing him?
I worked very hard on that scene. I'm a huge Sorkin fan, and I am very grateful for so much of his work. And I watched all of Newsroom. I enjoyed it, but it was fun to spoof.
I'm sure it was, and I loved, just so we're clear, I loved the food room, which Amy's spoof of the newsroom. I thought it was great. I thought it was really funny, and mostly I thought, I've got to get Amy Schumer to like me.
Oh my gosh!
That was the chance.
We like each other. It's done. Your work is done.
Tom, how about you?
I don't know if I have one particular, I don't regret any of it. I mean, you make a lot of mistakes along the way. If one thing I regret, I think early on, finding, like as a young writer or as an actor also, which I was, and director, finding like-minded people that I could connect with and make myself better by. And maybe just, because I always thought of like networking. I remember my father telling me you have to network in this business. And I thought, I'm never networking. I'm never going to do it. And I'm not great at it. But I think as a result, I kind of shut myself off from some of that. And I think as I started to connect with people creatively, and even going to Pixar for the first time after I did The Station Agent, was so expansive. It was such an expanding experience for me. Because suddenly I was around all these like really odd, goofy, wonderful, smart, talented people doing exactly what they wanted to do. And I think it started to unleash me in a different way. So I feel like maybe I wasted time, shocker, as a young guy.
I love The Station Agent.
Oh, that's very good.
Nick, how about you?
I would say it's similar in that I came out to LA to be a writer and then immediately bailed. Immediately thought it was too hard. There's no way. All that talk in your head won, and I immediately became an assistant, and then I get to be an executive. And, so you start to shadow artists, which I think is incredibly dangerous for you. It's incredibly dangerous for the person who is the writer, because you shouldn't be trying to even unconsciously write through that. Like, it's all very dangerous. But I can't say I regret it, because I learned so much about writing and about the process. And I got an incredible mentor in that process. So I don't regret any of I don't see that as a mistake, but there was a lot of time spent not writing, which now I use as a writer, but I don't know, I could have just written.
Who was the mentor?
I ended up working at Egg Pictures, Jodie Foster's production company. So she really taught me story and storytelling. And so, she's so amazing at that it was a great way to learn storytelling.
Where did you go when you left?
Well, you do that crazy thing where you throw yourself off a cliff and you're like, if I don't write, I'm never going to do it. I've got to just quit. And everybody's like, what? You work for Jodie Foster. You can't quit. And I'm like, no, but I think I'm going to. I think I'm going to just quit. And I quit and immediately had 2 babies because there is no better distraction from writing
Okay, I quit.
than having babies. So
That's pretty good.
But then I wrote and had the babies and just, did what every writer has to do. Like, even if you can, let's say, coach or develop at a high level, that doesn't mean you can write at a high level. It's completely different parts of your brain. So you have to go write the 5 bad scripts that nobody will ever see, and go back to the bottom of the process and learn an entirely new thing. So, and it's hard because that part of your brain is always telling you that you're doing it wrong. So I did other things. I wrote bad plays and just things that analyzer couldn't be expert at. So,
Nick, you said before we started this that you also threw stuff out, and you said you started on scripts before novels, but you gave up your work, you gave up teaching to write. Was it a difficult decision?
No, not when I was, I was whatever I was, 26 or 27 years old. I didn't have a family. I was with terrible teenagers all day. It wasn't a big decision. You can always make teaching money by working in bars or teaching part-time or whatever. There was no money to give up. So it really didn't feel like a very high-risk thing. The thing that gets you down with writing, I think, is you feel like you're walking a plank, and everyone behind you has got jobs and mortgages, and you're getting older and older, and you're still the guy who everybody else has to dip in for when you go out for a pizza, and that can become a bit embarrassing. But I've never regretted embarking on the journey, no.
Do you all tweet?
I do not tweet.
I also do not tweet.
I do not tweet.
Little and rarely and reluctantly.
I never tweet. I have never tweeted.
Amy?
I tweet. I tweet sometimes once a day, and then I'm a Twitterer.
But you respond. You engage with people.
Sometimes, yeah.
Best and worst Twitter experiences.
I don't know. I mean, I've gotten a lot of death threats, so those are the worst.
Oh, wow.
But the best, just like things like Gloria Steinem tweeting at me, or just people that are like your heroes reaching out. I remember during the first season of my TV show, Puff Daddy was like, "That girl's funny," and I was like, "What?" Like, and it connects you to people that you would never be in communication with.
Do you ever feel a burden to tweet?
Yeah, I was going to ask, yeah.
No, and I hear that that's the fear. Like, there'll be this, like, what do I write? Like, you're going to get writer's block from a tweet. But no, it's just if something occurs to me that I think is kind of funny, or if to promote something or to help friends promote stuff. Or
It's in actors' contracts these days, isn't it, to bring a certain number of their Twitter followers?
I've only been cast in one thing, and I think they just assumed I'd do it. But
Were any of these death threats real?
I'm here. I was just told by Barbara Walters that talking about them brings more, so.
The internet has become just the source of everything that's negative.
Yeah.
That's positive too, though. People are messaging me on Facebook saying, I don't even know if you read these, but my son or daughter, we never knew what was going on inside of them. They're a special needs kid, and suddenly because of your movie, they're talking about their emotions. Or a kid talked to me about he made up with his dad because at 11 he got moved, and they never talked about it. And so there's also a lovely part of it. They can actually tell you how they're receiving the movie, and so I'm finding that the most gratifying part of
What about you, Erin?
I try not to read that much of it, good or bad, because I'll then become addicted to it. The only way I'll be able to feel good about myself is reading something good, and I will also search out the bad stuff. But the internet in general, while I recognize everything good about it, that you can start a revolution with Twitter, even though the world had revolutions thousands of years before Twitter was around.
They did?
There are things about it that I find troubling. I think that the anonymity of the internet has made us all meaner and dumber. I'm just wondering, as I know I'm not the only one to wonder this, but that this thing that was supposed to bring us closer together, I don't see it doing that. I see it doing the opposite.
What do you think? Agreed? Disagree?
Yeah, there's so much. It's awful. I mean, but my personal experience of sort of that feedback was it's been more positive. But if you want to find negative stuff about yourself, it's out there. But for kids, I'm so grateful I didn't grow up when Facebook or YouTube was a thing. It's on permanent record. Your thoughts as a child.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's so much easier for kids to bully other kids with social media, because you're not looking anybody in the eye when you say, I don't like you, or you're ugly, that kind of thing. You're doing it from behind a wall of anonymity.
I don't know. Mean girls are mean girls, man. They said them in sixth grade right to your face. It did not
hold
Yeah, but you know what? When they said them in sixth grade, right to your face, they saw the effect of what happened. They saw you feel bad. They saw you start to cry. You don't see the effect now, but even more than just kids. And, kids ought to be enough. But even more than just kids, the internet takes away credentials. Just the whole idea of credentials, that credentials are important. There's a great book that I think written by Andrew Keen, K-E-E-N, called The Cult of the Amateur. Andrew Keen was one of the kind of the founding fathers of the current internet and the way it's set up for social media. He believes he's created a Frankenstein's monster. For instance, if you're coming up and you want to be a journalist and you can't get a job at the Hollywood Reporter, the thing to do now is to start your own blog and attack mostly the Hollywood Reporter, okay? And turn things on their head and say, those guys, well, they're in the pocket of whatever, and that's going to be their MO. So we've seen credentials go away, and that's a big deal.
When we were, Josh Singer, my co-writer, and I on this film Spotlight, we were doing a lot of research, sort of preliminary research on this, and we sat down with this guy, Clay Shirky. I don't know if you ever heard anything by Clay, who's was one of the first guys out on the new media frontier, and had some interesting thoughts and sort of circled back after he saw where it was heading, which is like I think there's a little bit of a sort of disconnect in the general public of understanding of new media. There's so much more information that we're all better off, and there are citizen journalists and all this sort of aggregate. But the question is, where is it coming from? So you have legacy journalism, which is greatly diminished. Year by year it gets worse and worse, right?
What is that?
Newspapers, real solid, high-level investigative journalism. And so who's supplying the news anymore, right? So I think that's what you're talking about with accreditation, right? So, what's the word?
Credentials.
Accreditation, I made that up. But you can use that if you'd like. I think that's something we were when we were dealing with the film, we're like, I think there's a real, and now talking with people as we're screening the movie, we realize that people are like, well, there's more information than ever, but the question is, how valid is it? Has it been edited? Has it been checked?
When you did the research on Spotlight, what did you come across that surprised you?
That was one thing. And by that...
And we should say, for people who haven't seen it, that it's about the Catholic Church's attempts to cover up
the movie,
pedophilia.
Right. Well, the movie deals with the 2001, predominantly it deals with the 2001 investigation into the Catholic Church by the Boston Globe Spotlight team, a 4-person investigative unit. So in 2001, newspapers were at the height of their powers. It was before the kind of crash of 2000, 2005, 2006. So we don't really deal with where we are now. We just sort of show by example when things worked, and this investigation worked extremely well. But so we didn't have to really editorialize in that way. We didn't have to comment on that. We just said, we'll show by example what it is and hope the discussion follows afterwards. People would say, where are we now? Which it's pretty dire, the journalism industry.
Well, I think Emma's right, though, that when you learn to distinguish between what's a proper source and what isn't a proper source, then the material that we have available to us now is incredible.
Like if you're looking up your warts, right? You find the Mayo Clinic website. You don't just go for wartsrus.com.
Moving away from the internet, when your film Room is a fascinating situation about a woman who's been imprisoned in a dungeon-like setting with her kid. What research did you do for that? And when you did, what surprised you?
Well, I had done most of it for the original novel. And the funny thing was, a lot of my research sources, I was just trying to get information from them. So I looked up things like, video interviews with, say, Elizabeth Smart. And then I got fascinated by the form itself. I mean, the horror of these interviews, how incredibly nosy and intrusive they were. So things that I was going to just to get information on the lives of those who've been kidnapped, I actually got fascinated by the media around them, message boards about Elizabeth Fritzl in which total strangers would be saying, she's my hero, the putting people on pedestals and then knocking them down. So I got very interested in the kind of, meta aspects of it. And then when we were doing the film, we did a bit more. We found a few sort of extra details, but it was mostly a matter of researching as many different situations that had anything in common with this 5-year-old growing up in a locked room. So mostly we didn't look at kidnappings, we looked at situations like refugees.
When I was a little older, when I was 17, I was walking home from
Where
school.
was I?
You were still up in heaven. But there was a guy, he pretended that his dog was
What
sick.
guy?
Old Nick. We call him Old Nick. I don't know what his real name is. But he pretended his dog was sick.
What's the dog's name?
Jack, there wasn't a dog. He was trying to trick me, okay? There wasn't a dog. Old Nick stole me.
I want a different story.
No, this is the story that you get.
You're both novelists. How do you find the screenplay as a form compared to the novel? Is it more difficult? Is it less free?
Isn't all writing hard?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the thing you notice, first of all, is the space. That it's 120 pages with not very much writing on them. And in a novel, if you're writing a scene that works, there's no real reason to stop writing that scene. And if it's 15 pages and everybody's enjoying those 15 pages, then an editor will leave it and say, this is great. But a 15-page scene in a movie, that's a big moment. And so it's having to lose stuff that you liked or were proud of or pleased with simply because of the demands of the form. But I really like the collaborative aspect. And
writing novels is a slightly lonely and monastic business, isn't
and when
it?
Tom was talking earlier on about networking and finding people, I mean, that's the thing that I've enjoyed most as my career has gone on, is meeting the right people. And I didn't know them when I started writing. Of course I didn't. And you're given more and more opportunity to meet kindred spirits and work with kindred spirits.
But you also have executives giving you notes, and they're not always good notes.
See, I don't know if Emma and I had those kinds of executives.
I don't have an executive giving me notes. I've had for the last few movies, Scott Rudin, who you talked about before, who I think is a fantastic script editor. By the way, 120 pages would not get me to the end of the first act. And so I like Scott's notes a lot. And then I've worked with great directors like Danny Boyle and David Fincher, and they'll have some good notes too. I really like the collaborative aspect of it. I like the amount of time. I mean, it's a long time when you're by yourself. I don't know about you guys. I'm not a speedster as a writer. It takes me a while. It takes me a while before I even start typing anything, just to kind of think.
Do you have a routine that you follow before you write?
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks a lot like lying on a couch and watching ESPN to the untrained eye.
But do you change your process for film and television? This is a question for both of you.
Do
I'm sorry, I gasped.
You're just going to interrupt me?
I don't think that's possible, but no, I wanted to ask, I read the book and saw Room and the performances, first of all, Brie Larson, and what's the boy's name?
Jacob Tremblay.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
he was 7 when we cast him.
I mean, the movie was also very disturbing, of course, but the book, there were more details, there was more, and I was really wondering how you would handle that. Did you just have a sense of sort of what would be kind of palatable for people to see in a movie theater, where you would, do you know
We
what I'm
tried
asking?
not to worry about that stuff too much. We were aware that breastfeeding is a particularly disturbing thing to show on
That's
film.
Stop the Hills Have Eyes.
Cannibalism.
Something so unnatural.
Cannibalism would be fine.
Yeah.
Breastfeeding is really
How
touchy.
dare you.
But also, we were being careful with our child star too. It's
Sure.
the thing he was touchiest about too. So
Yeah.
I would say some young men watch the entire film and don't notice the breastfeeding. Even though there are about 4 moments when you see it, but you see it in a kind of a hitch up the t-shirt way, and they just
Right.
don't see.
Yeah.
But no, most of the time we tried not to worry. I remember I had such a dream experience working with Lenny Abrahamson, our director. There was no, faceless executives telling me what to do. It was just one-to-one with Lenny around a kitchen table, But I remember him saying to me, look, we could get a mainstream audience for this film, but only if we make it without compromise. We can't pander to them or we won't get them. So I just, trusted him with that. But most of the time you're not seeing anything graphic anyway, because the child perspective kind of protects you from the more.
That's a choice in Spotlight as well. I mean, how much did you think about what audiences would and would not want to see about the underlying behavior here?
I don't think we really considered it. It was more just our avenue into the movie. It was through the journalists and through their experiences. So we were seeing what they were seeing. And the victims or survivors, I should say, the survivors they were sitting with at this point had come forward, 20, 30 years later. So we're meeting men, particularly in their 30s and 40s, who are now coming forth with their stories. And so there are a couple scenes where we see children, but we never see the act, because it really wasn't about that. It wasn't relative to the story or the reporter's experience. So, I think, and I agree with Lenny, who I think is a great director and a really smart guy. It's sort of, I think we probably all agree here. You just got to forget about that stuff. You always have an audience in mind, but you're just going after the story,
How much did you feel free to move away from the actual facts of what happened?
Not that much, actually. We really tried to stay as close as we could to the events. We just found them too compelling. We felt like we didn't need to invent that they were there. It was more choosing what we could not include, because it was a 6-month investigation. We had 2 hours to tell the story. So, and I just then, spending so much time with reporters and a movie about authenticity, which is what it is at the end of the day, we felt like we could then not be inauthentic. We actually had a moment where halfway through this investigation, spoiler alert, 9/11 happens. And as you know, a couple of planes left Logan, so everyone in the Globe team was taken off that investigation, which they were very close at that point to almost cracking it, and put on the 9/11 story. And when we were screening it early on, some people would say, like, wow, that's really, having that moment really takes me out of the movie. Maybe you should remove it. I'm like, how do you remove 9/11 from a movie, again, about authenticity? So they're wonderful challenges, that I think you got to deal with.
We need to focus on the institution, not the individual priests. Practice and policy. Show me the church manipulated the system so that these guys wouldn't have to face charges. Show me they put those same priests back into parishes time and time again. Show me this was systemic, that it came from the top down.
Aaron, did the criticism from Apple sting you at all about Steve Jobs?
Not really, no. For one thing, I understand it. Tim Cook, Laureen Powell, a widow, a good friend, and colleague wanting to protect the memory of their friend. For another, they hadn't seen the movie, and people very close to Steve who had, like Woz, like John Scully, former CEO, Joanna Hoffman, Andy Hertzfeld, Andrea Cunningham, people who knew Steve very well, especially during this period, who had seen the movie, had been very enthusiastic about it. The tricky thing, because you're just talking about facts with Steve Jobs, the thing that has surprised me is how surprised some people have been that it's not a literal biopic, that it's not a what we're used to, a cradle-to-grave story where you land on the greatest hits of the character along the way. I can tell you that I didn't distort, pervert, or invent any facts about Steve Jobs for this movie at all, except one, which is that Steve did not have confrontations with the same 5 people 40 minutes before every product launch that he did. That's plainly a writer's construct. Just like if I wanted to write a movie about you, an interesting way to do it might be to have the whole thing set right here, right at this round table where other conversations can be had.
Even if it's a cradle-to-grave biography.
Yes,
never the whole thing.
Of course, it's never the whole thing, and moreover, it isn't, and I don't think it should be journalism. I don't think what you want from art is a Wikipedia page shot nicely. It ought to be subjective and not objective.
I started with the Apple II team because we don't, make that anymore.
Just acknowledge the top guys.
Have a mimosa and relax.
You will not blow me off right now, Steve. The top guys...
There are no top guys, all right? On the Apple II team, there are no top guys. They're B players, and B players discourage the A players.
I have a question because I'm really curious about this. I love the structure of the film. I thought it was really inventive and original. There's something about the structure of the film that feels very theatrical. It feels like it could have been a play. Knowing you have written very successfully for the theater, I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, because I think that's really interesting and valid to some degree. I enjoyed it as a movie, but...
No, it is valid. And I think that the reason why they're saying that, I think there are two reasons why they're saying that. One is simply the amount of language in it, but the other is that in the theater, we're very used to things not being literal. And in the movies, we are not so much used to things being literal.
It's interesting, right?
It is. For instance, last season there was a play on Broadway with Helen Mirren playing Queen Elizabeth again, called The Audience, right? Which was just a look at Queen Elizabeth, not an entire look, which would take a really long time. She's a fascinating and complicated woman who's led an extraordinary life. So look at a little bit of Queen Elizabeth by the structure of it being a meeting, an audience with 8 or 10 of her prime ministers. So Helen Mirren is playing Queen Elizabeth for a stretch of about 50 years of her life. I promise you that none of what transpired in those scenes with each prime minister was true, but no facts were altered. The reason why why I know that they're not true is that there's no transcript of those meetings. Those are Peter Morgan inventions. Peter Morgan also, not coincidentally, wrote the movie The Queen, for which Helen Mirren won the Oscar. All of those scenes would have been invented, but in movies, you expect it to be literal.
Well, you do, and because you do, it does create a problem when, for instance, you portray Steve Jobs as having a somewhat different relationship with his daughter than may have been the case.
I didn't. Like I said, I didn't change any facts or distort any facts.
A lot of people disagree with that. Lorene Jobs, for one.
What has Lorene Jobs said about Steve's relationship with his daughter?
Lorene apparently called a lot of people and said, don't be involved with this film. This isn't...
Lorene did call a lot of people and said, don't be involved in this film. She hadn't read the film. She didn't like Walter Isaacson's biography that it was based on. Now, Walter's biography was comprehensive. He is a very well-credentialed journalist. He was the managing editor of Time magazine. He ran CNN. He had written 2 very well-received biographies before that, one about Albert Einstein, the other about Benjamin Franklin. And this was not just an authorized biography, it was a requested biography. And they explicitly told him, don't pull any punches, don't whitewash anything. Again, I want to be very clear. I did not distort or invent any facts about Steve Jobs except the one, which is that he did not have these confrontations
I want to one last thing about that before. Nick, how much do you feel, you did Brooklyn, which is based on certainly real situations, how much do you feel you can stretch historical truth?
Well, I mean, it's a very simple story, Brooklyn. It's the story of a girl who emigrates from Ireland to New York during the 1950s, which was true of hundreds of thousands of people. And so you can more or less come up with any version of that and you would be able to find a historical counterpart. I also trusted Colin Toybeen, the author, because, he's a great novelist. And I wrote the scene where Ailish, the lead character, arrives in New York and she comes to Ellis Island, and Colin describes all this beautifully in the novel. And I did my own version of that. And then just before filming, one of the production team phoned up and said, you know that people stopped coming to New York through Ellis Island in about 1934. And I said, no, I did not know that. And I called Colin and he said, oh, that's interesting.
We need Irish girls in Brooklyn.
I wish that I could stop feeling that I want to be an Irish girl in Ireland.
All I can say is that it will pass. Homesickness is like most sicknesses. It'll make you feel wretched, and it'll move on to somebody else.
I have a question for Amy. What do you do when you have writer's block? Or do you have writer's block ever?
No, because I usually sit down with something pretty specific. Again, I feel very honored to be at this table as someone who's written one movie. I don't know if I would make the mistake of ever writing something so autobiographical again, because you have to talk about how true is this? How true is this? And you're like, who cares? And basically with the nature of my movie, they're just like, how many dicks have you seen? Like, how many dicks have been dangling in front of you? I was very protective of the character I was playing. It was sort of me if I had been suspended in where I was sort of sophomore year of college with sleeping around and drinking a lot. And I think knowing people are so quick to dismiss a woman is like, oh, well, okay, so she's a slut. Okay. And so I was really careful with her. And so the one of the opening scenes of the movie, they wanted me to shoot it where it was like my POV, a lot of guys on top of me. And I was like, no, that makes everyone think, oh, okay. I said, they're at the door. Like you have to be just real careful with what people are willing to sort of go along with you for. That definitely is not about writer's block.
I actually have a quick question about that, because I like that sequence and how you handled it. Was that something you addressed in the script stage, or was that conversations with Judd directorially?
Long conversations with Judd where I was like, trust me, I know what people are willing to forgive. Because I'm used to, I've been lucky. I'm a stand-up, I'm my TV show, that's it. And so I have the final say in most things. So it was a lot of, trust me, I'm going to protect this girl, and me being like, because he had final cut, and he didn't even have to let me in editing if he didn't want. But it was a lot of conversations and fighting for.
Before you went into production, or did some of that
during
happen?
production?
Oh, right, cool.
Yeah.
How much did you guys improv, like with Bill Hader and LeBron James?
There was a good amount of improv. Yeah, it would be. We would shoot it sort of as scripted, and then we'd play, and people.
How much of the play
takes
takes made it into the film?
I don't know. A bunch, statistically speaking.
Hello?
Oh, hey there, it's Aaron.
Oh, this is Amy. I think you butt dialed me.
No, I dialed you with my fingers. What'd she say?
Shh. He called me on purpose. Hang up. He's obviously like sick or something. Please, yeah, what's up?
I was calling to say I had a really good time last night. I was wondering if you wanted to hang out again.
Will you say that again, please?
I was wondering if I could see you again.
You know what? I'm gonna call the police.
Are you on set a lot?
Yeah, well, I'm like in almost every scene, but yeah.
Doing other stuff.
Yeah, I was.
Is that true? So if you weren't in a scene or in a day, imagine because you shot a lot, you had to be tired, you'd come anyway. And
oh yeah, I was there every second.
What did Judd teach you? Judd Apatow, this is.
Thank you.
What did Judd Hirsch teach you?
Yeah, I'm like, what other Judds are there? Judd taught me a lot. He taught me, I was really lucky that I had someone I'm sending scenes to going, that's good, just encouraging me. Just because had he once said, I would be like, you're right, I'm gonna go back to the funny bone. He was really encouraging me, and he taught me to trust my instincts and the people I know who are funny. And he taught me that, like, when you make a lot of money, I was like, what? I was like, what's it like being like really rich? And he was just like, there's like nothing to buy. And I was like, all right.
Who has taught you all the most? Or is there a script that you've learned the most from, or a person?
I mean, certainly being in a brain trust at Pixar teaches you a tremendous amount very fast. The notes at Pixar are coming from the other filmmakers. They're coming from Lee Unkrich and Andrew Stanton and John Lasseter. So is
there any one memorable thing that has changed how you think about writing?
No, because I've always approached writing as what's the idea in here? What's emotionally, thematically, what are we trying to say? And that, as a writer, certainly when you're working with Pete Docter or Pete Sohn, or it's always the director, I'm trying to dig that out of the director, but I'm also trying to make sure that it's so human that I can also write that, because we've gone so deep down into what their idea is that it's kind of hit the human condition. So once we have that kind of DNA, then I know how to take the notes. Otherwise, you're just changing all the symptoms on the top, and then you just get new symptoms. Like, what are we doing? So, at Pixar, you're also screening the movie many, many, many times in storyboards. So you're getting 300 sets of notes, and then you're going to the brain trust. I mean, there's just tons and tons of voices coming in. And
that seems like such a wonderfully unfair creative advantage, you know? Like, I'm so jealous of that.
You have to love getting notes. You have to love going.
Great.
Like, can't you set it up for yourself, just your friends and people you
Yeah,
think
but they're doing it in process, so they're rewriting as they're doing it. It'd be less like shooting a movie, watching a couple cuts, being like, let's
you
go
make
back
the
and shoot
movie
again.
many times.
Great.
You literally watch the movie and storyboard. I mean, it's so
writing for
collaborative.
animation different from live action?
Oh, it's just, I mean, collaboration doesn't even, I don't even know, what is a word bigger than collaboration? You know, the storyboard artists, I'm working with 12 storyboard artists. They work in story. Their department is called story because they are storytellers. They can change the scene if they want to. You're working more like in television, I guess, where there's a lot of storytellers at the table, but you're also, you're still the writer, and I'm working with the director to get his vision and keep it a whole thing and keep that DNA moving. And, you know, sometimes you'll get tons of notes about this scene isn't working. You need to change this scene. But the problem is that's the director's core scene. That's his scene. That's the scene he loves. Yeah. So then I have to go, well, maybe it's we haven't earned it yet. And it's 3 scenes back. Like, can we earn that scene then? You know, like, so it's always kind of to look for the note under the note. But you can't really do that unless you know at least the world we're on of what is that DNA, what is that emotional heart of this movie. You know, Jody would call it the big, beautiful idea. You know, what is that big, beautiful idea that we're trying to communicate out to the world?
What are your favorite things to do?
My favorite? Well, I like it when we're outside.
That's good. Like, there's the beach and sunshine. Oh, like that time we buried Dad in the sand up to his neck?
Well, I was thinking more like rain.
Rain is my favorite too. We can stomp around in puddles, you know, there's cool umbrellas, lightning storms.
More like when the rain runs down our back and makes our shoes soggy.
I went to give a reading once at Pixar, and I just couldn't believe what was going on and the creative energy of the place. And going there with a book that just seemed to have been sort of cobbled together out of my own head. I felt like I was showing Steve Jobs what a pencil did. You know, there's
it's
there's
amazing.
Story over here and there's art
Our
over
books
here.
are a bit masturbatory, aren't they? As you said, you know, if we're enjoying ourselves, we just go on and on and on until we want to stop.
Yeah.
You know, the character designers and the sets, you're starting to make the movie as you're churning this up, and you're sitting in a room with Ronnie Del Carmen, who is a genius, and Pete Docter, who's a genius, and Josh Cooley, who's the funniest guy ever, and then Amy Poehler comes on, the funniest, nicest, sweetest person who
killed it, didn't it?
Oh my God! Like, you know, it's just, you know, so. But there are also times in any creative process where you're like, okay, we've gone backwards, or crap. There are those really, really hard times.
Did you change the script when Amy Poehler came on?
Well, in animation, they're doing their voices, but they can. I mean, they're amazing, genius comedians, so they can throw lines. You know, so. She really fit Joy so perfectly because she has the great vulnerability that you need in Joy. Otherwise, you know, an incessantly happy person is incredibly annoying. You know, we have to be really careful about that. And Pete Docter was such a genius in trying to what is her goal? It's this child. Her goal has to be the happiness of this girl, not herself. You know, I thought that was a genius kind of construct for her to keep her, and then always watching in the writing that her response to feeling vulnerable and out of control or upset is happiness, but you have to see first the holy crap. You know, the kind of upset, vulnerability has to come up in her first, and then she'd be like, okay, I know what to do. But if she's just like, I know what to do, you'd be like, oh, you know?
Erin, you mentioned in a previous interview that you were approached to write a Pixar movie.
Yeah.
What was that, and why didn't it happen?
I'd never met Steve Jobs, but he called me 3 times. And the second call was to ask me to come tour Pixar in the hope that I'd write a Pixar movie. And I love Pixar movies. It's something I would love to try, and I'm particularly drawn to what you called a creative advantage, the fact that you can kind of do it, see it, and then
mess about.
And redo it. You go back into the room and tear it all down.
But I can't remember exactly why I didn't do it, but regrettably, I didn't.
Going back to that question, is there a film or a writer or a play that really influenced and shaped your writing?
A few. I mean, when I was starting out, William Goldman took me under his wing, and he kept me there. He's still the person I show pages to and talk to from.
Did you show
from
him the
time to
Steve
time.
Jobs script?
Sure.
What did he say?
He said they're really going to let you do this. He was very helpful.
Is he
with
as
all
brutal
this.
as his reputation? I've never had the privilege of meeting that guy, but what I've read about him, is he, I mean, in a wonderfully smart way, but is he as brutal as he's made out to be?
He's just wonderfully smart, and he's, listen, there's a bit of a curmudgeon about him, but it's very charming. It's not threatening in any way. And
Nick and Emma, how about you?
I've learned the most being brand new at this. I've learned the most just from going through, from writing the script based on my novel, right through to seeing it getting made. And individual scenes where all the dialogue fell away, and I realized that's still my scene. And I wouldn't have known that starting out. I would have thought the scene is really the words they speak. I was all about the dialogue at first, and I now realize that in almost a homeopathic way, they can take away all the dialogue and it's still the scene. And I even began enjoying when the actors improvised, whereas I was really tense about the notion of them improvising before. I remember in the writing process about draft 3, Lenny said, "Oh, that's a family meal, they can improvise." And I'm like, no, I'll write them great lines. Let me write them great lines, And then on the day, they were doing lots of improvising, and I at that point trusted them. I trusted they had their characters, and I liked what they came up with. And because we were working with a child, it seemed to make sense to improvise a bit, because when you want that completely naturalistic, bouncing on the bed, fun with mum stuff, you have to let them improvise.
I didn't read the book, actually, sadly. Now I've seen the movie, which I loved. But that transition, like midpoint through the movie, like I had no idea. I thought they were in the room the whole time. And it's when they...
And you were prepared to stay.
I was. I was feeling it, though. I was like, oh boy. But when did that concern you at all, that transition?
Well, you see, in fiction, you can do anything, right? There's no rules at all. Fiction is wonderfully baggy.
Yeah.
So the book is in 2 halves, and I knew that would make an odd-shaped film, but I had a feeling it would work.
What's the separation in the book? You actually
half and half.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The film, the escape maybe a little bit, including the escape scene that gets you to halfway through.
Right.
So the film, the first half is
great. You've never been trapped in a room, but there is that saying that you should write what you know, which Amy, you did, I guess. How much do you feel a writer should write what he or she knows?
Oh, I don't know. I think people should do what they're good at. And some people are great at writing fiction. I know I love reading fiction and historic fiction. I like to write what I know, but I also like to daydream a lot.
Is what you know the external situation, or is it the internal, what you know about life and what your perspective on life is and what you've observed and seen? That can happen on Mars, that can happen in a room. Like, I don't know that what you know has to be the external. I mean, certainly for a beginning writer, that might be easier because it's right there.
That's the thing, that old Updike line about hugging the shore. I think the process of getting older is pushing further out.
Right.
And you say write about what you know. I don't know that much.
I would have run out of material.
But my career is going on, so I've got to find some other stuff. And of course, maybe Aaron didn't know that much about Steve Jobs before he wrote the movie, and you find out stuff and you dramatize it, and that's the joy of the job.
I didn't know actually anything about Steve Jobs, and more importantly, I didn't care that much.
Yeah.
And God knows I didn't know and still don't know anything about technology. I'm technologically illiterate. My point is, it can become what you know. Your take on a particular story is going to be framed by your subjective view, and so I think that if you lined up 10 writers and asked them to everybody write a movie about Steve Jobs, I think you'd get 10 very different movies. We're well on our way to proving that. The Santa Fe Opera Company just commissioned an opera about Steve Jobs, and the people you were talking about before, the Apple literalists, their heads are going to explode when they try to explain to people that Steve Jobs wasn't a tenor who sang an aria, but it's going to be those writers.
The ride at Universal Studios is killer.
Through the mind.
Oh, my God.
Is there anything you wish you could go back and that has been made and completely rewrite or redo?
Of ours or of somebody else's? Or?
Actually, either one. Is there a film you'd love to rewrite?
There's nothing I've ever written. There isn't a single episode of television, there isn't a play, there isn't a movie that I don't badly wish I could have back and do again.
I don't feel that way. I feel like
Go to hell.
I did it. Because I nailed it. That's a great feel. No, because it's a process, right? And it's what your first question was about. What do we regret? Hopefully we don't regret that much. I think like that's what Amy's movie is so great about, right? It's like all the mistakes we made and the cumulative and the sloppiness of it. That's what I love about your movie, the sloppiness of it, and in so many ways. And I feel like it's what gets us to where we're going. And I think better than regretting if you can kind of steel yourself for it and like accept it and work through it. Like you were saying, jump back into the next project. It's just the best way to get where we're going. It's a lot less painful.
I think the impulse to write is to take what went wrong before and use it with the next thing and to work on something fresh. And the idea of going back on anything now is a nightmare to me, actually. I just want to leave it there.
Do you feel that from Trainwreck that you want to, did it make you want to write more or more nervous about writing?
I love writing. I'm an introvert. And I feel it's such an escape. It's just I feel the most sort of it's time well spent. But and like you were saying, there is always somewhat of writing what you know, just something that feels important. That feels important to me to communicate. Even if it's nothing I've ever experienced, but this one thing that really struck a chord with me.
I saw and loved your movie, but if I had to guess between introvert and extrovert.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Well,
I have a question, actually, just because we'll never be around the table again, maybe. But, like, I feel like comedians, and I'm far from a comedian expert, so if this sounds dumb, forgive
Tom,
me,
don't do yourself.
I know. We were talking about writing what you know, and that's where comedians seem to really draw from, right?
Yeah.
And you seem to do that wonderfully. So, but have you ever done any in your comedy where you feel like, especially, your work where you feel like you're getting far from yourself, or have you?
No, I came from there.
Okay.
When you start out, everyone's just doing an impression of a comedian, pretty much. You don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I used to play a character on stage, and I would say really irreverent, kind of some racist. I played like this very, privileged, kind of almost white, sort of Republican chick.
Right.
And that's not who I am. I did not grow up with money.
Right.
I'm a Democrat. But I am white. And now I'm just keep getting closer and closer to myself on stage. And so, you were saying the messiness, the sloppiness. There are things I've said on stage that, people kind of treat comedians like politicians now, where they go, "What was this?" And they'll pull a quote and take it out of my set from 3 or 4 years ago and say, "What does that mean?" And it's like, it was a joke. Like it had a setup and a punchline, and I'm evolving. And so I don't regret any jokes I've said. But and then as a comic, hopefully you're evolving. And I really like a lot of different kinds of comedians, but there is something really appealing about people letting themselves be a little bit vulnerable, because being a comic is so much about control. Right. It's like such a yawn that we all had hard times as kids, and so as a comic, you get a lot of control, which it's why it makes the introvert thing a little less surprising, because, I'll be alone all day and my only interaction will be with thousands of people in the crowd that I don't have to talk back to. Mm-hmm. And if they talk back, I'm allowed to throw them out. But it's, I think hopefully you get closer and closer to yourself, I think. That's the
Do you deal with
stand-up I enjoy.
self-doubt as a writer, not just as a comedian, but you doubt what you do?
I think when any comedian who starts out is just delusional, like the thought that you warrant people's attention on stage is very stupid. It's less self-doubt and more experimentation, and it's like a science experiment. By the time I film a special or do something on TV, I've tested these jokes to the point of it feels like science. Like, this is where people laugh, and so I'll try it, and if it doesn't work, then I stop doing it, except for a couple times where I'll get really indulgent and it just makes me laugh.
Aaron, do you deal with self-doubt as a writer?
Yeah, no, sure. All the time. And I mean, it's like Sisyphus. There's never been a time when I haven't finished something and haven't felt like I just wrote the last thing I'm ever going to write. I can't. I'm not going to have an idea. Nothing's going to work. I've used all the words I know in every order I know how to, that kind of thing. And then when I am writing something, did I actually write a story? Before you even get to, is this good? Did what was in my head make it to the paper? So yes, I deal with self-doubt all the time.
Emma, what about you?
this is going to sound dreadful, but no. I mean, I often doubt that the work is good. You know, line by line, I might be like, that's rubbish, that's no good. But I try and spend as little time as possible thinking about whether I'm any good. I try not to have a sort of distinctive Donoghue style. Typically, people will have read 4 of my books before they realise they're all by the same person. I just try and serve the story, you know. So if it needs to be contemporary and funny, great. If it needs to be, you know, in sort of fairy tale language, great. It's not me, it's not me. So of course it is just as egotistical as any other kind of writing.
Are you Elena Ferrante?
I wish. But I just try and think of it as, what does this project need? What style, what techniques, what historical period, what vocabulary does this need? So that keeps all the pressure off me. I'm not in the spotlight.
I do the same thing. Like, I just somehow start to fight for the character, like fight through my own doubts, because if we don't tell their story, it's not going to happen. You know, it's not going to come into the world. So I just
I'm not often writing about
the
long
story
dead
and the
people,
characters.
so I feel
But
obliged.
that characters, it's going to come out into the world, and so when I'm starting to doubt or be like, oh my God, this doesn't work at all. You know, it's just, but you have to lean in because you have to fight for the character and for the story.
That's my quote. Lean in.
One of the things I've noticed working in films and books is that there's way more opportunity for self-doubt in movies because you get turned down endlessly by endless numbers of people. Whereas with my books, I'm dealing with my editor, and it's a long-established relationship. And unless I've completely screwed up the book, they will publish it. And if I've completely screwed it up, he will work with me very patiently to get it to a state where it's publishable. Whereas with movies, it's every week a financier. No, we're not interested. An actor's not interested. A director's not interested. And each one, I think, if you do have self-doubt, you're being hammered into the table just by the process. And one of the great reliefs about writing fiction is not having to deal with that.
You adapt other people's novels and not your own.
Yes.
Is that a formal decision you came to
Yes.
early, or did it sort of happen?
I decided, I did my first one, Fever Pitch, I adapted myself, and I enjoyed it, and it had to become something else. But when High Fidelity, the next book, was optioned, I thought, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend 3 years writing a book and then 5 years taking out all the bits that I put into the book in the first place and dealing with the same characters for what would probably turn out to be 8 years. I mean, that's the maths of it, that it takes more or less, or it's taken 5 years for all the movies that I've been involved with to be made and 2 or 3 years to write them. So I would really rather do something else. And the beautiful thing about adaptation is having access to somebody else's head. I think with fiction, there's always a point where you think, no, this one's going to be different, this one's going to be different. And then halfway through, you think, oh, it's me again. Whereas something like, last year I adapted Wild, and I could not have written that book. But, there's something I can do in the adaptation process. So it's really refreshing for me to adapt somebody else's.
I have a question for the women here. As writers, as women, and as consumers, what annoys you?
I'm so sorry.
What annoys you most when you see female characters written on screen?
First of all, I want to apologize for pretending to yawn. I was preparing myself for the heartbreak of usually the question that follows. As a woman, what do you guys think?
Do you get sick of seeing those endless girlfriend roles? In order to cast Ma in our movie room, I think I watched every movie that featured a white woman between 20 and 30. And so often you see brilliant actors like, say, Brie Larson, who we both worked with.
Great.
And the number of small girlfriend roles they get that are just so unworthy of them. So that annoys me in movies where women are so often the incredibly supportive element. I mean, even a good movie like, say, Love and Mercy, there'll be some angelically supportive woman propping him up, and there's just too many of these roles.
Do you find, as women writers, that you're not given the chance to write action pieces or male-centric pieces?
Well, I'm going to write Captain Marvel, so it's pretty action. Yeah. So I think...
Is he going to get his period?
It's a woman, Captain Marvel.
It's a woman. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I'm hoping, and perhaps this is naive, that if you're a great storyteller, that's the first stop. male, female. You're writing about emotion inside somebody's head. You're writing about a superhero. You're writing about a historical figure. You're a great storyteller. So I'm hoping that's the first stop, but perhaps I'm naive in terms of what they're looking for. But yeah, I mean, right now I think it's not ideal, but I think it's fine that they want a woman to tell a woman's story. I think that's pretty awesome. Ideal meaning that's all you get to do is do women, but that's okay. Like, let's have women tell women's stories. Let's do that.
People, they were asking me during the press about Judd and like how he's gotten a bad rap that he doesn't write enough for women. It's like, first of all, he has, and like, he's not like, you're like, why don't you write more for men? It's just strange. I think, yeah, if you sort of identify with that and you want to write about it, but I think it's a strange sort of criticism. I think it's different than the sort of diversity issue.
It's exciting that we got 6 movies here and 4 of them feature great female roles. I haven't seen your film, Nick. I've seen the trailer, but it looks great. But
it's still rare.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in Hollywood. I mean,
yeah, but I'm just saying it's exciting that we're at this table.
If you look at the statistics for, women over 40, there are no major roles, except for ones that Meryl Streep takes. Even with, a few years ago, several women running the studios. It's just not happening.
My next movie is an action movie with a woman in her 60s.
Really? Is it really?
Yeah.
Is it? Is this one you're writing Jennifer Lawrence, or?
No, we're both very young.
Is there a single
that's a
piece of
movie.
advice you would give to a starting screenwriter that you wish you'd know when you began?
Meet Judd Apatow.
Mm-hmm.
I think mine would be that when I started, I didn't know that everyone pretends that a movie is going to be made at the end of this process, that there is a pretense. And I thought that when things weren't going anywhere, it's because the script was terrible and therefore you should just pack it in. But in fact, that's all part of it, that there's hurdles, and that this pretense, producers are pretending, screenwriters are pretending, directors are pretending, and eventually, if you pretend hard enough, then it goes from kind of black and white to colour, and a movie's made at the end of it. And I wish I'd known that earlier on, that I would have chucked less out, I think.
All right, we have time for one more, and we will end it. But we wanted to ask everyone their favorite line of movie dialogue, something that has always stuck with you or that has influenced you in some way.
Not their own, Christine.
Not your own. It could be your own, I guess.
What came to mind right away was the movie Jesus' Son. And Samantha Morton's character and Billy Crudup, they're like, falling weirdly quickly in love. And she says, we're wrecking like trains.
That's a good one.
I just love that.
Great.
One of the movies that made me want to write was Barry Levinson's Diner. And I don't know why I always remember this line, but there's a scene where Mickey Rourke and I can't remember the other guy, they meet this beautiful girl who's riding a horse, and she says, my name's Jane Chisholm, like the Chisholm Trail. And they go, oh, right. And then one turns to the other and says, what fucking Chisholm Trail? And I don't know why. That seems to sum up my attitude to writing, really. What fucking Chisholm Trail?
Emma?
I'm so intimidated to be in this company. I cannot think of a single line from a single movie.
I can't either.
It's gone.
Oh, wow. Tom, what about you?
I'm almost of the same thing, and then I have too many, and I'm like, who would I? But for me, and this sounds a little bit like a cop out, and maybe it is, but it's silent moments that I go to. It's not having anything to say.
Oh, if we're allowed to pick them, the opening sequence of Up.
Simple idea.
The most
seem
perfect
easy at
short
the time.
film about any
Butch Cassidy
whole
jumping
life
off
with
the
no dialogue.
But that Butch Cassidy jumping off the cliff wouldn't have meant anything without the scene that comes, without the I can't swim scene that comes before it. Yeah. And you're right there, Tom, that there are silent moments in movies, like, for instance, Helen Mirren looking across the stream at the stag that stay with us for a long time. But generally, when we remember movies, we remember, and I'm only mentioning this because this is a group of writers around this table. Generally, when we remember movies, we remember lines of dialogue that stay with us, like, we're going to need a bigger boat, or something like that. But
is that yours?
That's Shakespeare.
Mine is actually from a movie that didn't quite work. I think it was in the early '80s, called The Competition, with Richard Dreyfuss and Amy Irving. I'm drawn to people who are, and especially writing about people who are really good at something. All the characters I write are much smarter than I am. They're much just better at what they do than they're really good at something. And this movie was about two world-class pianists who fall in love during a piano competition. And it really looks like Richard Dreyfuss is going to win this competition. And then he's standing backstage while Amy Irving plays her just ungodly difficult concerto out there. And she wins, and he's really dumbstruck. And she says, "You had to know I could play." And he just says, "Not like that." That line has always stuck with me.
And I would say I'm the opposite. I don't remember the dialogue. I remember images. Like as soon as you ask that question, I see images starting to flash. Like in the piano, he's dragging her over to cut off her finger. Or I see in Blue, she's coming up out of the water and hears the music and goes back under. Or Toy Story, when he looks out of the toy chest and the whole room turns into Buzz Lightyear. Like there are these kind of intense visual character moments that have plot in them, they have theme in them, they're visual, they're using the medium, they're emotional, like they're just these perfect moments. That to me is such amazing, that's what I remember. They're like these.
Maybe because Aaron's putting the screws to us now. Maybe Meryl Streep, How Do I Look at the end of Kramer versus Kramer, right before the elevator.
Oh, that's so good.
That question.
That's also a quote from The Wire. You look good, girl. Right before Snoop dies.
Something about the vulnerability.
And it was improvised.
We didn't know that.
They were shooting the scene, and Robert Benton overheard her say that and said, "That's how we're going to end it."
That's
genius.
Cool.
And that's how we're going to end this.
I'd like to thank all of you for taking part in Close Up with the Hollywood Reporter.
Thank you.
Thanks for playing.
So it's just images
Good
or
to end with
improvised
Robert
lines.
Benton.
This is really good.
So we're useless. Okay.